Chui Mui, Touch Me Not by Ismat Chugtai. At one time, traveling by first class by train meant that you had a private coach that was attached to the train. The coach was exclusively for you and it had its own toilet. It was in those days that the Nawab Sahib came to the Delhi station to see off his Begum. Begum was very pregnant and she was off to Aligarh for her delivery. Begum was accompanied by her maid, her lady in waiting, Muglani, who never left her side. As soon as the private coach was attached, Muglani got into the compartment, got into the private coach, and started pulling Begum from inside, while Nawab Saab gently pushed her from the outside. Muglani bellowed and said, बस बस एक और कदम बेगम जान, हाँ जरा सलवार ऊपर खींचिए, हाँ बस एक और कदम, आराम से. And with great effort, Begum took that one step and rolled into the coach like an inflated balloon. It's not that Begum was always born with a silver spoon in her mouth or she always had ayahs at her disposal. But the fact is that ever since she got married to the Nawab, she had been pampered so much that she had become this little girl had become this Mimosa pudica. Mimosa pudica? What's that? Well, it's the biological name for the plant Touch Me Not, or Chui Mui, which is where this Ismat Chugtai story gets its name from. You see, it is said about the Begum that just after her mother stopped feeding her, she moved straight to the Nawab's bed, which means that this little girl just blossomed into a flower without having any sense of life's harsh realities. And here she would wake up at a leisurely hour. And even when she woke up, she wouldn't get out of bed. And Muglani would flurry about her, taking care of her person. When she finally did get up, she was given the choicest breakfast that Delhi had to offer. And after that breakfast, she spent most of the morning just resting her pretty face on her palms and smiling blissfully. In the second year, that smile sort of faded and converted into nausea that the pregnancy had brought about her. Muglani was most thrilled, and she dived into this baby project with the greatest enthusiasm, stitching diapers and whatnot as if the baby was going to be born the next day. Begum was taken care of 100%. As it is, she had very little exercise, but if she ever turned to her side by herself, Muglani would bring the roof down as if the Taj Mahal had been moved. Peers and fakirs were always in the house, saying prayers and utterings that would drive away the evil spirits. Every taviz and amulet and talisman in town had been bought, and Begum was covered with it. There was not even place for a little mole to peep through. But despite all their good efforts, despite all this watch and care, the shell cracked before time. The expectations drew a blank. The blossoms withered away, and the branch was bare. But God is great. If the mother lives, there will be more. And so it was, and so they did have more. There was another pregnancy. But alas, despite the vigil, that failed too and drew a blank. This was now the third pregnancy. And of course, they had turned on the pressure even more. The young girl was filled with pills and syrups, and she was treated like a soap bubble and just not allowed to burst. No one could sneeze or even blow their nose in her vicinity, lest the bubble should burst. But a pall of gloom had descended on the young lady. She had begun to hear in the distance the sound of Nawab Saab's Shehnai of his second marriage. She knew that her horizon was very, very dim. As she boarded this train and she was traveling to Aligarh, she did realize that if she failed in this one conjugal duty, she would have given the Nawab Saab a ticket to get married a second time. He would have always have the excuse in the name of, his progeny, of keeping his name alive. So God alone knows why he wanted to keep his name alive. It wasn't much of a name to begin with. But This was the one thing that she provided. And apart from being pretty and being young, she had done much less. She had never paid attention to any of the needlework classes she had. And whatever she learned in school, she had forgotten. So she was in no way to provide for herself. And if her husband turned her out and took on another bride, she would have no way to support herself. And she would then be forced to provide that one service that she provided exclusively to her husband, to everybody, the world's oldest profession. And that is why this delivery was so important to the Begum. And as she was in this train of thought, the train came to a halt at the platform at the station of Ghaziabad. The platform was full of people. Begum started to have great tremors just looking at the crowd. But of course, nobody would come into their coach. It was a private coach after all. But just as the train started off from the Ghaziabad station, the door opened and a peasant girl came in. One coolie tried to pull her out, but she just hung on as a lizard. Muglani started hurling the choicest abuses at her and asking her to get off the train. But that girl hung on and then came into the compartment slowly and then sat down near the bathroom door. This girl was a young girl and she was very pregnant. Shocked looking at that, Muglani asked her, "Are, are, are, tum pet se ho?" The girl could not even say any words. She just nodded and held on to the bathroom door handle and started going into labor and writhing in pain. Her breath started coming in gasps, and little drops of perspiration appeared on her forehead like dewdrops on a cool ground. Shocked by her innocence and naivety, Muglani said, "Tera pehla bachcha hai kya? Is it your first child?" And this girl wouldn't answer. She was just in pain. And this frightened Begum tremendously. First of all, an intruder had walked into her private coach, and now she was having labor pains right there on the train in the berth right next to her. But this girl was in tremendous pain, and as she was in her pain, tears rolled down her cheeks. Begum and Muglani were watching, and Muglani's litany of lament wouldn't stop. She kept hurling the choicest abuses at that peasant girl. And in the middle of all that, suddenly a red lump of flesh came out and fell near Begum's shoes. While Begum and Muglani looked at it, suddenly all hell broke loose when that little mass of flesh let out a full throated yell of a newborn. The peasant girl was almost dead from exertion. When she came to her senses, she gathered the little baby in her arms, half giggling and half crying. Not knowing what to do, she used her own clothing to wipe the child. And then she tore a bit of her dupatta and tied the umbilical cord, and then looked up at the ladies to ask for help to cut the umbilical cord. Still hurling abuses at her, Muglani gave her a pair of nail cutting scissors. The girl cut the umbilical cord and then tried to breastfeed the baby in a clumsy manner. By now, her tears had dried, and she was having these occasional fits of laughter, like as if someone was tickling her. She then wrapped the baby in a rag and placed it under the berth and stood up. And that threatened Begum, and she started screaming. And Muglani tried to soothe her. But the peasant girl just walked to the bathroom, got a pail of water, and cleaned up the mess that she had created. She cleaned up Begum's brocaded shoes and set them to rest against the wall. She washed the nail cutting scissors and she handed them to Muglani, who asked her just to leave them on the floor. And then she picked up her little baby and sat down by the door of the bathroom, like as if someone had finished a whole day's of work and taking a rest. When the train halted at the next station, she got off the train and a ticket collector stood there saying, "Ticket, ticket." And the peasant girl just opened her dupatta and showed her newborn baby with such a flourish as if she was showing jamuns she had just stolen from a orchard next door. The ticket collector was so transfixed by this. He didn't know what to say. The little girl laughed and turned away and vanished into the cloud. The train lurched and started its journey. And just as it started, Begum, who was sobbing all through, let out a searing scream. Muglani turned to her and said, Begum Jan, aap theek ho? And the look on Begum's face struck terror in Muglani's heart. The sight of that bizarre delivery in front of her eyes had unnerved the Begum, and she had had yet another miscarriage. Begum's baby had got cold feet and wilted away before entering the world. Chui Muni by Ismat Chugta.